So we've come to the final question, the last question put by the Lord's many hostile critics to undermine his authority. Jesus has already silenced the Sadducees in a resounding affirmation of the resurrection. Now it's the turn of the scribes and Pharisees, and they too will be reduced to silence. Jesus first cites Moses' command to Israel in Deuteronomy, to love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. Words from the Shema, the prayer at the heart of daily Jewish worship. The command to love your neighbor as yourself can be seen to précis the many passages of the law like that in today's reading from Exodus, which urge our concern for the stranger or immigrant, for the widow or single parent, for the orphan or children in care, and the poor who fall into debt, those preyed on by loan sharks. Jesus is not replacing these more detailed requirements of social justice and compassion, though, of course, we may be adept at ignoring their demands in present-day society. So where does that leave us when the migrants, the vulnerable, and the poor are ill-treated and exploited? The first reading from Exodus not only commands justice, not only tells of God's compassion, but is blunt about what will happen when God's law is forgotten. It speaks of God's wrath, of the violence and death that will be visited even on Israel, on his chosen people. So as sophisticated North Oxford types, can we simply ignore that assertion of God's punitive justice? Well, God in his divinity may not lose his temper. He may not be moved to anger in the way that human beings are moved to ill will. But when people desert his laws, whoever they may be, they expose themselves to further evils that their own violence has wrought and brought down on them. Violence, as we see it unfold today in Israel and Gaza, breeds violence, adds fuel to flames. For without justice and compassion, lasting peace is unattainable. Yet the God of the Exodus does not only promise a punitive justice. Through the prophets, he will promise a Messiah. And that returns us to our gospel. For where the lectionary stops this morning, Matthew's gospel, of course, does not. Jesus at once turns the tables, puts a question himself. What is your opinion about the Christ? Whose son is he? And if we place these questions in their dramatic context, near the opening of the Gospel's passion narrative, we see the terrible ironies that play around this scene. All here seemingly agree upon what love of God and neighbor should be. And all place their hope in the advent of God's chosen Messiah to bring about his justice. But those who proclaim such things will in fact kill the Messiah, the one man whose life has been wholly just, wholly compassionate, and who, in a further reversal of expectation, will then make of his death the means of bringing about God's justice. As my novice master, Father Herbert McCabe, never tired of preaching, Christ's cross just is in this fallen world what love of God and neighbour leads to and what it looks like. That's one of the most painful truths of the Christian faith. Lost or denied when a false theology attempts to shift the blame for the crucifixion onto others in anti-Semitism, say, in racism, or some other kind of denial of our common fallen state. We then underestimate the forces of evil that both confront us and lurk within us. But if we're really in the business of loving God and neighbour, and go to the cross with Christ, we shall need the power and victory of the risen Messiah, the Spirit poured out upon the church at Pentecost. We shall need the divine life communicated to us in the holy humanity of Christ, in his precious body and blood, which is our Eucharist. And we shall ultimately seek and receive his merciful judgment at the resurrection of the dead.